So I lost an 800-hour save. I was really mad about it. That took the wind out of me for quite a bit. So if you were wondering where the Night Rain videos were, it's because I wasn't playing it. I'm gonna be honest. But now I'm playing it again. Every sorcery here is gonna be ranked from a Duchess frame of mind, and the way they synergize with both her standard and deep relic effects will be of the utmost importance. This list will end up clashing quite a bit with the opinions of Recluse mains, because Recluse can actually get her FP back in a safe way, whereas Duchess either needs to be up in the weeds hitting things with a main hand weapon for any FP regen to happen, or just become a lore-accurate alcoholic. So I think my heaviest criteria points here are going to be FP efficiency, synergy with Duchess-specific relic effects, the chance of finding the spell to begin with so that you can, build around it, and whether or not the sorcery consistently delivers.
Brute force alone will not lead to victory.
So be it.
I will have my revenge.
When do we fight?
Number 65, Scholar's Shield. I had this one placed only slightly higher initially because I believed it could save you from completely going down if you fuck up a parry. But if you are Duchess and you have a D in stamina, there are very few attacks that won't just immediately stance break you no matter what the guard boost on your shield is. And in that stance broken state, the very next attack taken from anything will one-tap you. And I'm obviously not saying that as a factual statement, but considering I've been one-shot by a torch from a Wandering Noble in Depth 5, I would be very surprised if almost anything actually turned out to be accurate phrasing. Like a fucking demi-human might not be able to one-shot you, I guess. I also don't think running a parry build is the most optimal way to play Duchess, despite the in-game relics seeming to give you a lot more critical-related buffs than casting buffs. But Duchess is a caster, first and foremost, and any build involving a shield is probably not something you should have on to begin with. If that's what the game gave you and you're just trying your best with what you have, then absolutely. I won't say there are zero exceptions to this rule all the time, but casting should be your priority. Also, fuck you. Why does the Armament version get 90 seconds and this one only gets 60? Number 64, Eternal Darkness. So if you're in Depth 5 as Duchess, you're basically doing a hitless run. Like, you straight up cannot take a hit from anything under common circumstances. And I say common circumstances because sometimes you can find a passive that gives you damage negation at full HP, which can help you take a hit and stay in the fight. But if you don't have that, and you've wound up with this eternal void of competence as your only safety curtain, you best be ready to look stupid as hell trying to use it. Its description says it affects sorceries and incantations, but basically any non-physical projectile it can eat up. Avatar's Golden Slam, Loretta's Glintblades, Noster's various and assorted bullet hells, but it covers a painfully small area, needs 25 FP, and honestly just cannot reliably keep you safe even if you're standing directly under it. It feels like it was specifically designed to counter bullet hell attacks, but like only ones that come from a certain angle. All the boss attacks I mentioned earlier have like this slightly downward pointed angle because of how short you are in relation to the boss targeting you, which usually gives these bullets enough elevation to still get swept up in the radius. But basic Glintstone shards from basic enemies just pass right by it. Like, I'm jumping over this Glintstone Pebble trying to get it to track into the effect radius, and it's not happening. The pull effect is just way too small. It gets overshadowed by every sorcery similar to it, since Carian Retaliation has offensive utility, Thops' Barrier has a much larger radius, and both need way less FP to cast. Even if you're on Recluse, it's not that much better. Recluse is more tailored to staying in one spot and just Wizard 101ing a boss's balls off, but if you're on Duchess, you can't afford to waste 25 FP on a shitty umbrella. Number 63, Freezing Mist. If I want something to happen, it needs to happen fast, and that includes proccing status effects. So unless I see a frostbite bar literally above my target's head gradually building up while they're in the cloud, I'm just gonna feel like it ain't doing shit, even if it is. Having a sorcery that only builds status means it's completely unaffected by sorcery and magic attack power passives, and Duchess is only sporting a C in Arcane, so if you land on a staff with Freezing Mist on it, it would unironically have better performance if it was handed to a Scholar instead. I would much rather my application of Frostbite be done with something else, like Moonblade, Icecrag, Zamor Ice Storm, even the Hoarfrost Stomp Ash if I start with it. And on Depth 5 solo runs, you absolutely should. Freezing Mist needs 20 FP, and I can't really comment anything specific for its FP efficiency, because its damage output is directly tied to whether or not it procs Frostbite. Most bosses have a habit of not sitting still when a group of chuckle fucks is trying to kill them, and the ones that do sit still tend to give you much faster ways of disposing of them. And since the Frostbite damage burst is mostly percent based, using it to kill trash and build stacks it's kind of just like stupid. Yeah, I don't know what this one's supposed to be doing in this context. Number 62, Founding Reign of Stars. I'd never liked this one, even in the base game. I feel like it takes way too much setup and forethought for it to even land on something, and if a teammate is holding a boss still in a critical animation or with an ultimate or something, I think just about any sorcery you can find would sink in more damage in the time it would take for the boss to get back up. I've maintained since the beginning that the 3-second delay between when the spell is done casting and when the rain actually happens is the reason the sorcery is in the position it's in and why no one gives a shit about it. Because the pace at which you or your team can kill shit matters way too much for me to figure out how to properly play around such a long delay. It's also one of the only sorceries in the game where charge casting it takes away 5 more FP than normally casting it. And usually this is something that would get patched out in base Elden Ring, so I'm not really sure if this is intentional, but it sure don't seem like it. I've heard 0 people talk about this, and I can only assume that's because everyone is just hoping the passive would show up instead, even though the sorcery variant actually deals way more damage, with each tick of the star rain measuring in at 49 damage or 54 if charged, while the passive buff only deals 15, and I'm gonna be honest, I think I'd still rather have the passive. I mean, at least that one doesn't cost any FP. Number 61, Comet Azur. Comet Azur takes some of the worst negatives you can find on any other sorcery and combines them into a level 10 XYZ fusion monster of a drawback. Exhausting to wind up, flushes all your FP down the toilet, locks you in place with no lifeline if something attacks you, and it only shoots in a single direction with very minimal correction if your target moves even a little bit to the side. It is specifically to be used only when you can guarantee your own safety on a solo run, which is almost never, and when the targeted enemy is so helplessly inert that when in duos or trios, any amount of focused fire would just do the same job and more anyways. Even if you can squeeze damage out of it with a certain build, throttling your whole FP bar is not a wise decision for Duchess because she has very limited means of actually getting that FP back that doesn't involve starlight shards. If you've popped your ult and you're looking for enemies to build stacks off of because you have that one relic equipped, finding a row of enemies in convenient single file is never something you should just count on, and when that does happen, Glintstone Arc, Adula's Moonblade, Comet Shard, Comet, Night Comet, all of these spells are better at handling that situation, and all of them do it with more movement and less FP expense. Number 60, Swift Glintstone Shard. Everything about this sorcery just comes up short. It's just a big ol' not quite enough. Range isn't quite enough. Damage, not quite enough. Stagger power, not quite my tempo. The only compliment I can give it is its low FP cost, and even then, Slicer is still 1 FP lower and does way more damage despite it being melee range. Under very uncommon circumstances, I can see it performing kind of well when you're just cleaning up trash or like finishing off low HP targets, and you need a slightly faster way to kill it that isn't literally just your starting dagger, but I would still have other sorceries for this purpose like Night Shard, Slicer, Pebble, pretty much anything, like I'm gonna be honest. This sorcery can't even be guaranteed on its own staff, and it's worse than a sorcery that appears on all gray tier staffs except the Digger staff. Pass. Number 59, Glintstone Stars. It's not terrible, but it is the weakest of the Stars family, and one of the largest advantages these sorceries have is its revive power at range, and Glintstone Stars don't even have that. The one benefit it does have is that most targets with the ability to dodge will do so at the wrong time, because the dodge is being triggered by the initial projectiles and not when they actually begin traveling toward the target. Gravity Well and Collapsing Stars also have this benefit, and both of those sorceries are multiple leagues above this one, so just shoot for those. Star Shower and Stars of Ruin also have this benefit, and both of those sorceries are also multiple leagues above this one. It's just a magic damage group of projectiles that travel forward and hit something. Like, I don't know what to say. It does its job, it's just that the job, well, it sucks. Like, sorry. I prefer casting this in solos rather than duos or trios because when a target isn't looking at you, it makes it much harder to judge what that target will do next, and a Zamor Knight or a Stone Skin or a Black Knife could easily just move out of the way of some other attack like they very commonly can and do, leading to this spell's accuracy becoming suddenly very questionable. However, you can sprint cast it for some extra mobility, but the same advice can be applied to both of its better iterations, as well as some of Duchess's best sorceries that we'll be getting to much later. Number 58, Crystal Barrage. Generally, anything that requires complete stillness to cast is something you're probably just better off without. With the already little survivability you have in Depth 5, a spell that takes away all your movement is a nightmare if you're doing a solo run. However, if you have a team taking aggro, then really the only thing left to rank it by is its FP efficiency, and boy do I have bad news on this front. Holding the cast can return some pretty high total damage, but getting to that number also takes a total of 48 FP, and, something way more expensive, faith in your teammates. Simply pressing the button only expends 14 FP, but the damage when doing so only barely climbs above that dealt by a basic Glintstone Pebble and at double the FP cost. Recluse is way better at putting the sorcery to work due to her ultimate just being a constant FP battery she can feed off of while casting it, and as Duchess, your FP bar is vastly more limited by comparison. Now, if you're not running solos and you've teamed up with a Recluse, this can sort of change things, but I mean, making that exception for every sorcery in the video, I think would kind of just defeat the point. Number 57, Loretta's Mastery. Anything with this steep of an FP cost is already an immediate turnoff for Duchess, but firing it at something when you're any closer than sniper range almost guarantees that the two outer projectiles will just outright miss. I don't want to go too into Nightfarer differences here since I mainly just want to focus on the sorcery itself, but Duchess doesn't have the innate regeneration a Recluse is capable of, and her best FP regen is most likely going to come from successive attack bonuses, either from Dark Knight of the Wise or from a Night Boss passive. And that's not something you can easily capitalize on when you are this far away from all the excitement. The uncomfortable amount of time it takes for this sorcery to fully charge is kind of supposed to tell you that you're not going to be completely safe unless you're firing this from overseas or some shit. And even then, that likely places you far away from your teammates as well, so if you fuck it up, then reviving you is going to be kind of inconvenient. There's also map geometry you need to worry about, and unless you're making it a point to always fire it from high ground, the likelihood of the bottommost bullet headbutting the curvature of the fucking planet is absolutely something you should prepare for. The damage and FP efficiency is only kind of valuable, and that's even if all 4 bullets manage to hit the same target. Number 56, Frozen Armament. There's not too many situations when I would search for this one, but it does stack with the relic effect that puts frost on your starting weapon. Having the basic frost affinity relic effect procs a status on the menial outside in 4 hits, and putting on Frozen Armament takes it down to only 2 hits. It gives you a reason to actually consider spell duration effects, which is something I almost never look at if I'm Duchess. I don't know, if you can manage to land on it and one of your presets involve powering up against frostbitten enemies, then this one might be worth, but there's little benefit it'll have outside of this specific setup. And in solo runs, you should probably have Hoarfrost Stomp always on to begin with, because it's one of only 2 weapon ashes given by a relic effect that has you starting with both range and status. If you can get that on a relic, I personally think it'll serve you much better than just an imbuement buff. Number 55, Ambush Shard. Ambush Shard is more awkward than holding hands under the table with your crush in middle school. It is fucking weird as shit. Its casting speed doesn't quite compete with Night Shard, but the gimmick behind Ambush Shard is its purpose of bypassing shields, making it kinda useful for clearing Banished Knights or Crucible Knights if you're going after Castle. Grafted Scion can get tricked by it, and it fares well against Tree Sentinel, but I can't really think of any other big boss that actually uses a shield. Well, for blocking, I should add. I think that's a pretty important distinction. The revive power on this one is also kinda nice, but I'm probably not going to hold on to a staff that has Ambush Shard on it for that reason alone. In fact, if you got this sorcery from the staff the merchant sells you, that one also comes with Night Comet, which is not only a way better sorcery, but also way better at reviving. Number 54, Roiling Magma. So my argument for Founding Rain can just be copy-pasted right here. I'm not gonna fight around delays and long casting times when most other sorceries don't have those consequences. Roiling Magma deals way less damage and has no lingering damage from its magma when landing a direct hit, making it less FP efficient. Purposefully missing or casting it at the ground in anticipation of an enemy being near you during its detonation is more FP efficient, but demands so much forethought and knowledge of what the enemy AI will do, you would mitigate so much risk just by using another spell at that point. I don't think it's possible to be completely sure you just won't fuck this up. The revive power is 87 per tick, which seems insane, but doesn't really pull as much weight in practice. Direct hits with the sorcery will do the 87 damage to a downed teammate, but the magma afterwards doesn't stay on the floor for long enough to make a significant difference, and that's if the magma happens to land directly on your teammate in the first place, which also isn't guaranteed. Also, if I got downed and someone tried to get me up with Roiling Magma by casting it to the side of me and he just made me wait 5 seconds, I'd be pretty miffed. I think I'd be pretty mad about that. Number 53, Carian Retaliation. So I actually have this mildly funny clip of me casting this to absorb Astel's laser attack when he's at range, and I thought the sorcery countered it for like 2 seconds and just didn't give me the glint blades, but then I rewatched the clip and he just zapped the bench that was right in front of me. It can still be used to block a lot of shit though. Duchesses really like these magic encampments because it's a good way to get magic affinity equipment, but running through the halls getting shot at from 9 directions like Jason Bourne is no fun at all, whether or not you're on depth 5. Like, I just don't like it. And with Carian Retaliation, it it usually feels easier to just take the extra time and get rid of the ranged adds before going after battle mages. It can counter Loretta's Greatbow attack, Morgoth's throwing daggers, Black Knife's Blade of Death, kinda. You can play a friendly game of ping pong with the Tree Sentinels. There's a lot of hyper-specific niches it can squeeze into, but it only works on non-physical projectiles. And even then, I don't feel comfortable relying on this sorcery, because, like, anything can happen. Like, I don't know, maybe your dog sneezed or you need a piss. Any break in your concentration can lead to you getting one-tapped by something you absolutely should have parried. I know it sounds ridiculous, but friendly reminder, this is a depth 5 list. Like, it sounds like a funny exaggeration, but these are kind of things that you have to think about. Number 52, Briars of Sin. Briars of Sin actually isn't a bad sorcery at all, but being in depth 5 changes the playing field so much that use of this spell can actually fuck you over way more than I think people realize. Being the filthy Duchess garbage that I am means knowing the unexpected value of certain weapon passives like damage negation at full HP. Solos, duos, trios, doesn't matter what you're running, if it's depth 5 and you're playing Duchess, this passive is goddamn mandatory. You better pick this up, I'm serious. I would trade a purple magic attack passive over a gray defense at full HP passive. That's how important this shit is. And since the signature drawback of both Briar sorceries involve the loss of HP, that is a massive fucking problem. So if you're casting it once, you might as well just finish the chain and get as much out of your flask heal as possible, right? Nope, because then you run into an additional problem, which is that the Briar spell requires you to be in the danger range of most enemies for it to land, while not even being able to flinch bigger enemies. So chain casting it doesn't even give you that much of a safety window, unless you have restage invulnerability on, and even then I just feel like I'm wasting it. The windup takes too long, you risk bleeding yourself if you have the relic debuff that decreases your resistance, and even though the FP efficiency is high and the upfront damage is actually really good, there's way too many consequences with this one that I just feel like I'm gonna dick over my elo. Number 51, Briars of Punishment. All the drawbacks you'll have to shoulder with the Sin variant, you'll also have to shoulder with this one, except one. The range on the sorcery is actually pretty decent, and it can help with bleed procs from a comfortable range if you have someone else on your team that's building around bleed status. It's one of only 2 sorceries that allow you to proc bleed, but the HP sacrifice can still take away the benefit you'd get from a damage negation passive at full HP. And from there, all it would take is for one little thing to go wrong, and suddenly, whoops, ping, 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 I'm in need of revived. Oh, Executor, I hope you're not doing anything important. Casting it on a solo run is extremely awkward since it'll take a few casts to proc bleed on a target by yourself, and at that point, I would rather just stand at a distance throwing kukris at shit because that animation is way quicker and doesn't take away my HP. Number 50, Thops' Barrier. Man, I was ready to see this one sing in depth 5. Being able to just redirect every non-physical projectile to ever exist sounds like a bulletproof way to push through some of the game's most horseshit bullet hells. But when I actually went and tested it out in a bunch of different situations, it rarely ever came in as clutch as I was picturing in my head. I mean, yeah, it does deflect bullet spam from bosses like Urtree Avatar and Loretta, but the only Night Lord that got noticeably countered by it was Noster. I thought I could use it against Libra spam, but it didn't really seem to work. Additionally, being in depth 5 or even close to it means you've probably become used to just dodging around certain attacks in very specific ways. Most bullet spam can also be countered by just picking a direction and getting in some cardio. And when that doesn't work, you just remember that you're Duchess and you have the most broken dodge in the game. And restage iframes. And if you've been listening, then you also have a damage negation at full HP passive. You do all that and usually things work out just fine. The only attack that makes me sort of afraid enough to hang on to this would be the bubble spam from Everdark Augur, and even still, it doesn't even really help that much. The radius it covers is just too small to prevent getting chipped 100% of the time. You can also cast it over a teammate during a bullet hell attack when they're trying to revive someone, but that's only if you're running trios. Oh, and sprint casting it looks funny as fuck. Number 49, Star Shower. I mean, fuck, man, just hold out for Stars of Ruin at this point. Its only major benefit above Glintstone Stars is its revive power, and even that's not as great as I feel like it should. At least Stars of Ruin is guaranteed on Lusat's staff as a first sorcery. You can set your dormant power to discovering staves, and some merchants can sell this staff to begin with, meaning Stars of Ruin has a way better chance of ending up in your inventory than either of its weaker variants. The sorcery also breaks the convention of how the FP cost of each sorcery in the Stars family will increase depending on its version. Glintstone needs 12, Ruin needs 32, and so this sorcery needing precisely 23 FP to cast it feels like such a petty little fuck you that was just left in there for some reason. Number 48 and 47, Carian and Glintblade Phalanx. So in base Elden Ring, casting Carian Phalanx actually had some benefits. It offered the highest damage of the 3 Phalanx spells, and by a pretty tremendous margin as well. In Night Rain, this sorcery no longer has this benefit, and can't even compete with the total damage of Greatblade Phalanx, which I think in this context is way better. Even when considering revive power, Greatblade still does more overall damage to a downed teammate than either Glintblade or Carian. It should also be considered, however, that Greatblade consumes the most amount of FP, which is 30, whereas Glintblade and Carian consume 18 and 24 respectively. All sorceries in the Glintblade family can be good at getting in some extra damage without having to look for a safety window, since the blades are already there hovering around you, and since all Glintblade sorceries have this inherent benefit to them, I see no problem preferring Greatblade, at least over these 2 listed here, despite the bigger FP expense. Carian still feels like it needs too much FP, and even Glintblade's 18 FP feels kinda over demanding, since Gravity Well, Icecrag, GGS, all the Carian sword sorceries, and many others need less FP in exchange for dealing way more damage overall. Number 46, Night Shard. Enemies won't dodge it. That's about it. Actually, you know what? I kind of lied. There's a couple things here I can talk about. Using it as a main source of damage is about as efficient as using Swift Glintstone Shard, since this sorcery only deals 2 more damage than the former, but its revive damage is noticeably better, sitting at 73 compared to the 52 found on Swift Glintstone Shard. And enemies won't dodge it. Okay, now that's it. Number 45, Glintstone Icecrag. It's okay, but the range and damage on it both suffer greatly due to it also having status buildup, and the tracking and speed of the projectile is, it's fucking horrible, I'm gonna be honest. Frost application I think is all I would use it for, and then once it happens, I would just switch to whatever the other sorcery is and continue dealing damage. I feel like using a relic effect that gives you Hoarfrost Stomp just feels like a slightly better answer. Less FP, more status, covers a wider space, gives you range straight off rip, which is super important for Duchess. As long as this relic effect remains in the game and Hoarfrost Stomp remains as bullshit as it is, I don't see myself depending on much else when it comes to Frostbite. Number 44, Scholar's Armament. I didn't really like this one as much as I expected to. I thought the extra passive damage you would have gotten by just plugging all your relics into magic attack power would have helped a little bit, but even at level 15 with relics, the damage improvement only gets somewhere in the mid-30s. Granted, that's a flat amount buff on a dagger with an alternate moveset, so I mean, I understand why it's pretty low, but most of the time I'm probably gonna get attached to a staff more than I will a dagger, so I'm also gonna drop daggers in exchange for something else more often, and daggers might be the best weapon class to receive a boost like this. If it's on the very first staff you pick up, then I'd say keep it on you for a bit just so you can poke things with your starting dagger a bit faster, because it is better than the magic dagger weapon Ashe starts with, and I've been explaining why you should swap that shit out for basically the whole video. Number 43, Tibia's Summons. I don't have that many notes or reasons on why this one suddenly became worth a damn in Night Rain, but this sorcery is still stuck in a very awkward crevice between underrated and still bad. The damage is solid, and your target is usually a very predictable distance away if you have a teammate taking aggro during your cast, which tends to solve a lot of its tracking issues. Running solo leads to a lot of inconsistencies just because you're the only one there to take aggro, but getting off a successful cast still isn't too hard if you know what attacks to punish and whatnot. The revive damage honestly feels kinda good in the moment when the spell is actually hitting the teammate, but the animation takes a bit too long for me to consider it a revive sorcery. There are plenty of spells that technically have less revive power, but because they can be cast repeatedly, they just get people back up a lot quicker. The FP economy does feel pretty nice if you can deal with its weird tracking, and it can hit flying targets, which means it can also hit the heads of dragons and deathrite birds, and I can't believe I just recommended people to use this sorcery against a fucking deathrite bird. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. Number 42, Greatblade Phalanx. It needs 30 FP to get off the ground, just as mentioned before, but I still think the price is well worth the benefits it gives you. It's not only the highest damaging of the three, but its revive and stance damage are equally nuts. All three Greatblades connecting with a teammate deals 366 revive in total, which is almost, but still not quite enough to revive a 2-bar teammate in a single cast. But compared to the 270 you see on the Carian variant, and the 210 you get on the Glintblade variant, it's still pretty huge. 112 damage per projectile, and a little over 30 stance damage if all three hit the same target, which is something other Phalanx sorceries don't even come close to beating. Each bullet in the other two Phalanx sorceries only hit for 1 stance damage each, meaning you're only hitting for 5 and 9 damage respectively. It can really help munch up a target's poise if someone else on your team is running a crit build, and the damage honestly isn't too bad either, but casting this when playing solo does give me this constant feeling that I could always be spending my FP on something that's just better. Number 41, Terra Magica. This one is definitely tailored more towards the idea of staying still and zapping fuckers with Loretta sorceries from the safety of your nice little sniper's canopy. So it's no surprise why recluses use it 10 times more. But since you're dealing almost exclusively magic damage as Duchess, I still think it's something that should at least be considered from time to time. It's 20 FP, which isn't the cheapest, but doesn't exactly break the bank either. And if you're against a slow boss that can't really move around or dodge things that well, like golems and avatars, it might as well be something you just throw down before you start doing your damage. The reason you don't see nearly as many Duchess mains swear by this one is because it's not hard at all to get forced out of that little nest of damage you're trying to make, since a Duchess is usually expected to be way closer to the actual fighting than a recluse. And when almost every attack from a boss enemy might as well be a railgun, even smaller boss AoEs can force a Duchess to relocate if she's in melee range. Another big downside is that it's only 20% additional magic damage, unlike its base game counterpart, which is 22.5. I'm seeing some sources say it's 15, so here's my counter argument to that. Here it is. It's 20%. So I don't know where people are getting 15. Number 40, Great Glintstone Shard. It's slightly better than Glintstone Pebble, well, the damage is at least. Sometimes it's enough to kill shit, most of the time it's not. Honestly, I'd rather just land on Glintstone Pebble. I'm gonna need a full memory wipe to get this image out of my head, I've seen it so much. I am so goddamn sick of seeing this spell icon. Number 39, Glintstone Pebble. I do think the FP efficiency here is pretty comfortable when you're just blasting away at a boss because it's paying attention to one of your teammates, but there is a reason this shit appears on almost every gray staff. This sorcery just straight up does not kill shit quick enough in depth 5. There's a huge give or take here, but all the enemy HP is basically doubled if you look at all the depth 5 scalings. Even if you're stacking magic attack power plus 4s, that's only 40% more damage you'll be doing, and I'm like 80% sure you can't land on improved sorceries and magic attack power on the same relic. I'm like 80% sure, I think. So yeah, quite a massive deficit. Number 38, Night Maiden's Mist. Okay, so lots of surprises with this one, and usually in Night Rain that's a bad thing, but I actually don't think too ill of this one at all. I think the largest benefit of using this spell is that only you can receive its damage, whereas your allies don't get affected by it. So you can cast it in a way that zones enemies without needing to worry about your allies just like stepping into it or anything. Now, whether or not your allies actually believe this is, it's kind of up to them. So it might take you casting it at them while they're choosing like a weapon passive or something, and just hope they're smart enough to realize they're not taking damage. As for the downsides, it's one of the most stubborn spells in the game. It's not listed as an invisibility sorcery, so any relic effects that boost invisibility sorceries will not work on Night Maiden's Mist. Any magic attack power boosts given to you by relic effects will not work on Night Maiden's Mist, despite Recluse being able to draw magic residue from it. It's fucking Night Rain being Night Rain. I don't know what to tell you, cuz. Its damage is the same when cast from a raider or anyone else, no matter their intelligence scaling, and you're doing the same damage with it on level 1 that you would be on level 15. I don't think there is a single stat or effect in the whole goddamn game that affects this sorcery. But hey, the damage is still restageable, even though it won't do a lot, and having no level scaling means it can be a very comfortable sorcery to land on at the start of a run. Number 37, Shard Spiral. Maybe it's just because most of the Night Lords are too spry to catch the optimal amount of hands, but Shard Spiral is only going to give you inconsistent returns unless you know exactly what to go after with it. And just because a hitbox is big, doesn't mean Shard Spiral is going to be optimal. Adel is one of the largest hitboxes in the game, but he moves so fast the spirals just shoot right through him and only deal like 2 or 3 ticks of damage. Big hitboxes like dragons are a step in the right direction, but what you should be looking for is a long hitbox, which is the actual reason this sorcery munches up dragons as hard as it does. The secret here lies in the trajectory. Constantly be asking yourself, how many times is this gonna hit if I fire it at this enemy from this angle right now? And you've probably already answered that question with a couple good bosses in your head. Ulcerated Tree Spirit, Golden Hippo, Magma Worm, even a Revenant or a Troll if it's lying down after being stance broken. The damage difference between normal and charge casting is barely anything at all, which is good because that's not what you should care about. What you're after is that juicy ass stance damage, because that shit goes from 2 to 3.7 per hit, almost doubling the stance damage of a normal cast. I'm completely okay with admitting like 70% of this game's bosses dance around it and almost never get hit by it more than twice, but when you land the perfect angle with this and rack up like 9 hits on the same boss, it's gonna feel like you just qualified for Mensa. Number 36, Explosive Ghostflame. If you can manage to cast it without dying, the payoff is euphoric, and it's one of the best spells to use in a crowd once you've popped ult and you're building stacks. But using it when you have anything's attention is pretty much a guaranteed death sentence, unless you're good with the restage iframes. You can't go in dry with this. You need some sort of cover to help you out. Your ult, a guardian, or a tank for enemy aggro, maybe a teammate is busy landing a critical attack and holding the enemy in place. It doesn't matter where that window of space is coming from, you just need it to exist. The initial blast radius measures in at 6 Ichizakis, which is basically just slightly bigger than melee range. And the damage is pretty nice, and proccing Frostbite on something afterwards can total out to some pretty hefty damage, especially if it's on the same enemy that took the initial hit. I mean, honestly, it's a fine sorcery, but having it be your main cast gives you way too much to worry about in my opinion. Number 35, Meteorite of Astel. Oh, how different this list would be if we were in any situation other than this exact one right here. This is the one sorcery that makes me jealous of Recluse mains, because Recluses can outright surgically remove shit from the game with the amount of sustain you can get with this. But a lowly Duchess with no innate FP regen is going to have a lot of trouble not only casting it to begin with, but getting it to do the same numbers as a Recluse. The FP expense here is so enormous that holding it down for more than a couple seconds without a Cerulean Hidden Tier is actually impossible, even with Duchess's max FP at like level 15. Even if you have someone taking aggro for you and you're free to cast as much as you'd like, the sustain just isn't there. And using the relic effect that gives you a Cerulean Hidden Tier at the start of a run makes it to where you can bypass this hurdle one time, so you better know what you're doing with it. Recluses don't have to think about any of this. A Recluse can get her FP back passively by just yoinking residues from enemies. She can cast her infinite FP buff. She can just ult. I can't do any of that shit. Number 34, Meteorite. Okay, I desperately need y'all to just let me explain this one first, because this sorcery will not perform well at all in like 90% of the scuffles you find yourself in, but it excels so hilariously well as an opening attack for night bosses that I just feel like I need to signal boost it as much as possible. The Astel variant has an incredibly large initial FP cost, which is a major weakness that Duchess can't really get past unless she has Cerulean Hidden Tier. But the initial FP expense of just regular ass Meteorite is half the asking price of its cousin, and it's not hard at all to just hold it down for a good 3 to 4 seconds. This is what makes this sorcery so effective as an opener attack for big oblivious oafs like trolls and hippos, and especially against night bosses, because almost all night bosses spend a couple seconds just coming through the front door of the arena without any damage negation to help them out, giving you a short window of time for you to just pump them full of whatever you feel is optimal. And if you're a Duchess, and you just accumulated a bunch of relic effect stacks from the pre-boss wave of mobs, and you just happen to be casting this sorcery right behind them when they spawn in, then it's just, well, I mean, it's gonna feel like you cheated. That's not even a joke. It's just going to feel like that. Also, Meteorite deals a combination of both physical and magic damage, which is slightly weighted towards physical. So even if it may not help out as much as the other sorceries, those magic attack power +4s are still contributing. Number 33, Magic Glintblade. So the idea with Magic Glintblade here is to prepare a couple of them at range and then go in close with confidence that the extra damage will pile up after a few seconds of scuffling, making restages more comfortable, and with the added bonus of not having to think about a safety window when you're casting it. The damage difference when charging it versus a normal cast really isn't that great, but it is a pretty FP efficient way to break stances, since a charged bullet hands out 9.25 stance damage for 12 FP. Only problem is charged sorcery passives don't affect the stance damage of any of the sorceries, just the regular damage. It's fun doing pre-celebrations when you know a Glintblade's gonna hit a boss and be enough to kill it, but I'd rather shit just die when I tell it to, instead of being queued into a waiting room. Number 32, Loretta's Greatbow. Man, it sucks that I have to put one of my favorite sorceries down here, and it's not even like it's that far down. Like, this is literally the end of T1. This sorcery is where this section of the video ends, but no matter when I find this during a run, I either end up dropping it because I found something that's just slightly more comfortable to cast, or an invaluable passive forces me to hold on to it despite never using it. 292 revive power is great, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't beat Stars of Ruin or Canon of Haima, nor can it compete with the casting speed of any of the Comet spells. Once again, 13 stance damage is some fine-ass gravy. Meanwhile, Gavel, Bubble, and Rock Sling are all towering above it like 3 slightly overweight dudes staring into an empty fast food bag. Greatbow and Mastery share the same major drawback. Its most effective range is its only usable range. The time it takes to fully charge a single shot is still next to impossible during solo runs, and if all my passives are plugged into charged sorceries, this is liable to get me killed. It's honestly a good sorcery, but whatever job is currently in demand, there's always another sorcery right around the corner that just does it a little bit better. Number 31, Gelmir's Fury. I actually really like the damage on this against bigger and more stationary targets, but the stress of constantly expecting a one-tap from even the trashiest of trash mobs makes standing still for even a fraction of a second feel incredibly discomforting. So if you're trying to get off a safe cast with this, throwing in the restage invulnerability effect found on deep relics it's just about mandatory. The stagger value on the initial hit being just a tad higher would definitely help it see more use in solo runs just for that little curtain of protection, but the way it is now, I can't might even sneak up on something with my ult and then cast it, because as soon as the target realizes they're being smothered in magma, they will very understandably relocate. And that's kind of a problem, because 90% of this sorcery's damage hinges on its recipient not being able to run away from it. Coincidentally, however, both Night Lords with a fire weakness have lots of times during their fight where they just kinda stand still and be useless for a couple seconds. If you can catch Caligo in the middle of an attack, that's pretty much a guaranteed successful cast. And in the Noster fight, if Fardass isn't attacking you, you can kinda just cast it whenever you want, and as long as you're near him, he'll usually eat the majority of the damage. Casting it on Animus when it's trying to revive can chunk down its HP as well. Like, it's honestly really good at killing these two Night Lords specifically. I just wish it was more useful during the first couple nights, and casting it safely on a solo run that's almost just never gonna happen. Number 30, Rykard's Rancor. Biggest feast or famine spell in the game. Here it is. I feel like you can think of this as a slightly more pissed off shard spiral and with way more polarizing results. You're gonna know how good this sorcery is against any enemy within seconds, because it either won't hit shit or it's gonna annihilate their HP comically fast. It takes longer to get off the ground since the explosions don't start happening until around 3 seconds into the cast, but the tracking feels pretty decent and the fire blasts can hit an enemy every 0.4 seconds, which is definitely frequent enough to land more than a few good hits on bigger dudes. Ancestor spirits and ulcerated trees get obliterated by it, dragonkins and hippos as well. Caligo and Noster get fucking rinsed, but that's honestly to be expected. But any boss from the Tree Sentinel family can just relocate themselves in a random direction and immediately be out of its way for the rest of the cast. Dancer's too skinny, gargoyles don't give a shit. This might be one of the sorcery's greatest strengths, honestly. You can test it out on a boss, and you'll know from a single cast whether or not trying to land it again is actually worth it. Number 29, Rock Sling. Schizophrenic poise damage aside, Rock Sling is still physical damage, and Duchess builds are usually only optimal when speccing into either magic attack power, because almost every sorcery deals magic damage, or affinity attack power if you want your build to cover magma sorceries as well, or if you're running Faith Duchess. Physical damage isn't affinity damage, and Rock Sling is the only sorcery in the game that deals pure physical, making building around it kinda awkward without sacrificing damage from somewhere else in the build that you're really going to need on higher elos. You can spec into gravity sorcery, but I tend to build for much more consistency just to make depth 5 less miserable than it already is, and that usually means specking into either crystal or Carian sorceries. If I see a teammate that's fishing for crits, I might keep Rock Sling on me just to help out with the stance damage from afar, since connecting with all 3 bullets hands out 28.5 poise damage, not including relic effects, stance break passives, or anything else. Number 28, Carian Greatsword. If we're looking at the full Carian quartet here, it's definitely the least powerful of the 4. It only needs 12 FP to fire off, so the FP efficiency is still pretty good compared to most, and the wide sweeping attack makes cleaning up trash pretty convenient, but it always feels like there's something another Carian sorcery is capable of that makes it more preferable. Piercer can flinch Crucible Knights and Tree Sentinels with a charged cast, Moonblade comes with extra range and status, and Slicer's DPS is so torqued beyond everything in its competition that most casters start looking at the run like an easy W. You shouldn't, because it's depth 5 and nothing is free in depth 5, but I mean, I'm not going to stop you. Honestly, I understand it. Carian Greatsword still has a stagger value of 3, so if you get an Everjail boss like Omen or Nox Twins, it's pretty easy to stun lock them, and it's not like the damage is like terrible or anything. Like an attack MV of 268 for only 12 MP is like, that's a pretty hot sauce. But if I'm ever faced with a decision to replace that staff with another Carian sorcery, I'm almost always going to make that trade. Number 27, Great Oracular Bubble. There's no dedicated passive, it's not guaranteed on any staff, and I still snap pick this bitch nearly every time I see it. 1, because bubble, 2, because stance damage, 3, stays relevant for a long ass time after you cast it. The standard Oracle Bubbles also has this benefit, but I'm giving that its own paragraph of love and support here very quickly. Right now I'm just talking about the big bubble. Damage and stance break on this is pretty massive when it lands, and even if the bullet acceleration peters out before it gets to its destination, it can still hover around for long enough that you can usually trick a boss into headbutting it. A gripe I have with it is that it doesn't work nearly as well for sprint casting as I thought it would, since it limits your speed to walking no matter how you cast it. But 16 FP is still some good money, especially for 495 base damage on a charged cast, making it one of the more FP efficient sorceries you can land on, and the huge burst damage makes it easily restageable. There's a lot of different negatives holding this one back, I think, but I still think a fat, forward traveling projectile can be your best friend in dire straits. Number 26, Magma Shot. Okay, so this one's honestly a sleeper hit. I don't like building around fire damage as Duchess because Gelmir sorceries still don't come with their own dedicated relic boost, and personally, I think if you're speccing into fire damage, you might as well just try running Faith Duchess because you get way more options that way. But Magma Shot is the default sorcery that can be found on every Gelmir staff, which is still not the best consistency, but if you're building around any Magma sorcery, it's definitely best to build around this one. Magma Shot can also be charged, which gives it more flexibility with weapon passives. It leaves lingering damage that kicks in very quickly after the projectile lands, and it almost always scores a few extra hits on fat bosses like avatars and hippos. Dragonkins and commander bosses get munched up by it pretty good, and even the revive damage over time adds up quite a bit if your teammate can put a leash on their restless thumb syndrome. This post-hit magma spawns in like immediately, and 234 damage when charged is already pretty nice on the surface, but it feels like you always get either a little more or way more damage out of the entire sorcery, and it's only 16 FP. If you're not queuing with randos and you're just in a Discord VC with a couple of the boys, someone can play Recluse and change their starting spell to Magma Shot, and then as soon as that player finds a better staff, they can just drop you the old one. It's kind of scuffed and it doesn't come with a passive, but it's probably one of the only ways in the game you can just outright guarantee that a hyper-specific relic build won't be wasted. Number 25, Crystal Burst. You can charge cast it, it's cheaper and has a higher damage ceiling than its big brother. The performance is fucking nuts when cast at blunderbuss range, which is where Duchess should be anyways, and even if you're not in Deep of Night, it can still blast fuckers like a pressure washer. A lot of the other tier list videos I've seen have ranked sorceries specifically around Recluse builds, which does put quite the handicap on the utility of Crystal Burst, since you're almost never within its optimal range, but Duchess finds herself within bitch-slapping distance of her targets very frequently, and has the restage God mode bailout she can use in case that range quickly becomes dangerous, like it very commonly does. 13 bullets are fired in total, and if all the bullets hit the same target, the numbers this sorcery puts out is just, it's disgusting. Like, it honestly just feels wrong. Like, it feels like a number is out of place. Charging the sorcery is actually way more beneficial compared to OG Elden Ring because the discrepancy in charged versus uncharged damage is way more noticeable. It's actually just a dial worse than its Elden Ring iteration, but since your DPS matters way more in the context of Night Rain, I still think it just ends up being a much more effective sorcery to use. Number 24, Gavel of Haima. Gavel would be a permanent mainstay for me if it wasn't for the ridiculously overtuned FP expense. The way it works is that you'll get more damage and stance damage from a direct hit, but the stagger value is the same on both a direct hit and the shockwave it produces, and it can flinch some pretty heavy dudes out of their attacks. I would compliment the hyper armor on it because it certainly gives that in spades, but hyper armor doesn't really matter in a situation where a flick on the nose can take your head off, and restage invulnerability here can get kinda shaky because you would mainly be using it for the safety window and not for copying the burst damage when restage really counts. But the stance damage is still pretty nice, 23 if you're landing a direct hit and 16 for the shockwave surrounding it. It's insanely strong, but it still doesn't belong to any particular family of sorcery, which means there's no relic effect that can boost its damage, and the stance damage and hyper armor gives a strong impression that it's meant for trading, which is almost never something you can do without getting punished even in lower depths. Also, landing both attacks with this sorcery will proc successive attack bonuses like Wingsword and FP regen extremely fast. The FP regen doesn't do too much, but it does mitigate some of the high FP cost, and it makes for a pretty easy way to activate Wingsword if you have that talisman. Number 23, Zamor Ice Storm. It's worth considering on a Frostbite-centric build, but the time required to successfully cast it feels a little too long, especially when charging it, and in usual circumstances, I think the reward for pulling it off is still just kinda low considering Duchess's arcane scaling, but using that restage iframes relic effect I keep sucking off makes this sorcery incredibly easy to fire off, even in high traffic. When people say to abuse the restage iframes relic effect, sorceries like this are usually what they're thinking about. It can complement relic builds that feed into Frostbite like the Miasma relics, just like any Frostbite sorcery or weapon skill can also do, and the charged version deals almost no difference in damage, but does last a second longer, as well as dealing 3.7 stance damage per tick compared to the 2 stance damage on the normal cast, and that shit adds up fucking fast. Number 22, Magic Downpour. The charged variant doesn't have increased damage, but the main bullet does shoot 9 volleys instead of 5. And this is insane because charging a spell, assuming you don't have any passives that boost it, usually just increases its damage by a fraction of what it would do on a normal cast. Night Comet goes from 237 to 285, Cannon of Haima goes from 338 to 433, and Crystal Burst goes from 30 per bullet to 45. A charged Magic Downpour can do 80% more legwork than a normal cast, and it obviously obviously won't always be 80% more in practice, but it usually ends up being way more than what a normal cast would give you if the main bullet is close enough to a big enemy. And that's hella damage when your target is a fat hitbox like Godskin Noble, Erdtree Avatar, Moog, a Troll, most Everdarks, just about any Dragon boss, and even the Tree Sentinel family of bosses kinda get chewed up by these if you're close enough. It gives out a massive amount of sustained damage while also having a decently quick casting time, which does make it a little awkward to work in restage because of how spread apart the damage is, and a charged magic downpour is actually 4 seconds long, making it impossible to fit in a full restage. But this sorcery can still rack up extremely high damage against bosses with a large enough hitbox to eat up a good deal of the hits. Number 21, Ancient Death Rancor. I don't want to oversell this one and say this isn't just a more expensive Rancor call that also deals more damage and can't even be guaranteed on its own staff, because, well, that's kind of just what it is. But there are, in fact, a couple extremely small, and I mean like microscopic discrepancies between these two that I think more players ought to be aware of. Firstly, the tracking difference. Rancor call fires out a salvo of bullets that last for 2 seconds with a tracking value of 60, before then leading into a second bullet that goes for a little over 4 seconds with a tracking value of 120. ADR's tracking stays at 120 for the entire time its bullets are active, which can lead to having just barely more luck getting all the bullets in ADR to land on something at closer range, whereas Rancor Call sees slightly more accuracy at mid-range. Another detail, hardly more important, is its stance damage. ADR doesn't actually see a huge increase in damage versus Rancor Call despite casting 9 bullets instead of 6, but the major difference is that its stance damage for each bullet on a charged cast is 2. I lied, this is actually a pretty fucking important difference. I'll get more into why I like these two sorceries when we actually get to Rancor Call, but to briefly summarize, the amount of time these bullets stay active after casting is why the spell feels so comfortable. ADR and Rancor Call are also both amazingly effective when sprint casting. They might be her 2 best sorceries to sprint cast because you can provide a constant pressure to enemies while moving around enemy pressure yourself. Number 20, Rock Blaster. I think I may have underestimated this one a bit. The higher the normal FP cost can persuade some players into thinking it's a more complicated, less effective iteration of Shatter Earth, and there is a slight learning curve to it when it comes to using it safely in Depth 5, but this sorcery is actually incredibly versatile and puts in the work in a lot of different encounters. Holding it down just continues the drill attack until you run out of FP, since Rock Blaster only needs a fixed amount of stamina for the initial takeoff, but the depletion is way slower than on something like Meteorite or Crystal Torrent. If a teammate is holding a boss in place with a critical animation, you can just walk up to it and start the lawnmower for some very helpful damage over time. But there are some ways to make it work in solo play as well. Releasing it takes you into a slam attack which has a stagger value of 2, allowing it to flinch medium-sized enemies, a lot of which are encampment bosses like the various night camps, banished knights, nox monks, black knives, bosses of that, size. And some of them might be cherry flavored, which means they can drop some mean ass shit. If they're down after a backstab or a parry, you can immediately start drilling, and by the time they've stood back up, the slam attack just flinches them again, which is very funny and also will munch them up pretty quickly. Number 19, Crystal Release. You don't get your own horse to cast it from to take advantage of higher elevation, so you're gonna have to get a little creative, but I'm gonna be honest, this sorcery's got some secret to its sauce. First off, you have to be very close, like uncomfortably close to a target for the damage to feel like a good FP investment, since Crystal Release needs 34 FP to cast. That said, the enemy pool it's good against isn't nearly as shallow as I thought it would be. Most field bosses are either too mobile, like Red Wolf, too small, like Black Knife, or attack too frequently to safely cast it like Erdtree Avatar, and this is obviously incredibly discomforting if you're playing as Duchess. But there's a secret setup you can take advantage of to have this landing damn near consistently no matter who you're fighting. Since I said abusing the restage and vulnerability relic was so important like 7 different times, let me remind y'all what it actually does. 24 frames of just pure, straight up invulnerability just by using restage. And the reason this is so powerful is that you can literally be in the middle of something else and still use restage to give yourself these iframes. Something like, I don't know, casting a sorcery that renders you immobile for a very inconvenient amount of time. Fuck, wonder where I can find one of those. A lot of the bigger night bosses that have trouble moving around can also eat some pretty nice damage from this. Ulcerated Tree, Dragonkin, Centipede, Gaping, Phase 1 Nameless King, Mulg, Red Bear, both commander bosses. It chews up golems and dragons pretty well, but the FP expense is a little exhausting to tough through without any FP regen passives, and casting it to clean up trash usually just leads to you getting stomped. So yeah, I would not advise that. Number 18, Crystal Torrent. Listen, I'm gonna need you to just trust me on this one. From the perspective of a Duchess that doesn't have an infinite FP cheat on a constant standby tied to her ability, I was ready to have some pretty major gripes. First off, if you're depth 5 solo, don't even try to cast this unless you're invis and a boss hasn't seen you yet. Like, there's just no point. Guarantee your own safety first and then cast it. But if you're running duos and trios and someone is taking aggro, I kinda like this sorcery. Quite a bit, actually. But only if certain conditions are met. One, I don't want a single motherfucker staring at me trying to get a hit in because I am absolutely getting one-tapped in the middle of the spell, so someone needs to be taking aggro. Two, it needs to be a target big enough to compensate for the spread of the sorcery, which is why I like using it to clear trolls and castle. It's good as an opener sorcery when the night boss spawns in because they have that short couple seconds where they like physically walk into the fight, which is basically just a free damage window. When you're able to fire it off successfully, it munches up multiple thousands of HP from pretty much anyone you want it to. Cerulean Hidden Tier is pretty nice here, even with an FP regen build, because I'm not wasting a whole FP bar on a troll. But stacking the relic effects that gives you ult charge when defeating enemies makes it to where getting your ult is possible every other fight, which gives you a free window to just send this straight down mid and watch the numbers pump. Also, restage iframes. Good sorcery. Number 17, Stars of Ruin. Stars of Ruin can put the sauce on just about any caster-centric build, but I think its hidden superpower that most players don't pay attention to is how nutty this sorcery is at reviving teammates. It ain't no Canon of Haima, but honestly, it's close, like very close. A charged cast hits for 420 revive damage in total versus the 396 it gets when cast normally, giving it the second highest per cast revive damage of any sorcery, number one of course being Canon. Like, ain't nothing touching that shit. The FP expense is a bit heavy for a Duchess, but it's guaranteed on a Lusat staff. The damage is pretty nice when all 12 stars hit the same dude. You can safely get your bros back up with it. I don't have too many complaints with this one. Number 16, Collapsing Stars. Collapsing Stars isn't guaranteed to appear on a Meteorite staff, but the Merchant Outpost POI can sell a Meteorite staff with this sorcery on it. It's barely a sliver of consistency that isn't nearly worth building around in the same way you would spec into like crystal sorceries or something, but this spell is a pretty confident snap pick for both Duchess and Recluse, just because it's really good at putting damage into a big target. 441 base damage in total is pretty mean, and that damage is spread across 9 individual bullets, so the final damage is likely going to be much higher. Revive power is close to 200 if all the bullets land, and faster enemies have trouble dodging it because they're programmed to dodge the initial casting of the bullets and not when they actually start honing in. And it's only 18 FP. It's pretty hard not to like it. Number 15 and 14, Ranni's Dark Moon and Renala's Full Moon. Okay, so in any other circumstance, I would be recommending Ranni's over Renala's, but depth 5 can, I'm gonna be honest, it can be a real load of horse shit sometimes, and you need to be able to set yourself up to be a mitigator of horse shit, and that almost always means building in favor of consistency instead of what gives you the bigger numbers. This is why I believe Renala's variant pulls just barely ahead of Ranni's, because even though it doesn't inflict frost and only comes with the magic debuff, Renala's Moon always appears with its respective legendary staff, the Carian Regal Scepter. From there, just make sure you have on a relic effect that sets your dormant power to staves, which maximizes your chances of seeing the CRS, especially on shifting earths. Granted, if you do happen to find Ranni's Moon just chilling on a random glintstone staff over in a fort, I'd probably just stash that away in your pocket for safekeeping regardless. The FP expense is pretty painful, but since most of your builds are gonna rely almost exclusively on magic damage anyways, that extra 10% will go the distance on a shifting earth boss or a Night Lord. Number 13, Glintstone Arc. If you're playing Duchess how you should be playing her in depth 5, then you are going to need a crowd killer sorcery, which is just a sorcery that's really good at targeting groups of scattered enemies here and there and just mopping them all up. Shattering Crystal, Moonblade, Ice Storm, sorceries that can travel through enemies like Comet, that kind of stuff. And looking at this type of spell, I think Glintstone Arc is probably my pick for the most dependable, low-cost crowd killer that gets the job done quickly and almost never fucks it up. The damage is similar to sorceries like Pebble and Slicer, and it does cost a bit more FP than those mentioned, but it's still only 9 per cast. Firing 3 or 4 of them in a line makes very short work of demi-humans, wolves, Miranda sprouts, and it drastically lessens the hassle of searching for trash to kill in such a small window of time. I think my favorite thing about Glintstone Arc is that it can very easily capitalize on night bosses that spawn in lots of enemies beforehand, like Artorias and Demon Prince. These bosses give Duchess massive potential to stack her ult buff to such a hilarious extent that all it takes is a little bit of team coordination and the game has barely enough time to even show you the boss's HP bar before it dies. Number 12, Shattering Crystal. Alright, well, time to rewrite this whole fucking paragraph. The FP up tuning honestly isn't even that big of a deal, I don't think. Going from 21 to 27 just makes it feel slightly less comfortable to use during earlier parts of a run, but if you can thug it out and pop a couple rises with Dark Knight of the Wise on, that very rapidly becomes a non-issue. No, the actual kneecapper here comes with the recent patch replacing this sorcery with Crystal Release on the Rotten Crystal staff, meaning Shattering Crystal now only comes as a guarantee on one staff just like all the other blues. You can still spec into Crystallian sorceries on your relics and receive the payoff just as consistently, but I had this ranked way further above Crystal Release, not just because it was more straightforward and the risk of having damage thrown at you mid-cast is far less than the latter, but the consistency of being able to pull it from two different catalysts made a huge difference. Don't get me wrong, we're still starting the final tier with this one because despite everything, it's still cracked like the pavement of Greater New Orleans. It's just, I had this in my top 5 sorceries on the first draft because of its consistency, and we just no longer have that now. Oh, and it's also insane at reviving teammates if you're point blank. Number 11, Cannon of Haima. I'ma be real, its FP efficiency is garbage. The windup leaves you way too vulnerable if you don't pay attention, and it'll never compete with the comfort of apex sorceries like Night Comet and Rancor Call. But once you unlock the remaining 10% of your brain power and figure out how to use this spell safely, it is going to be your carry. Cannon of Haima needs 38 FP, which, holy shit, I think that's one of the most expensive sorceries in the whole game. Yet its upfront damage feels strangely undertuned, especially since some sorceries demand half the FP for similar and sometimes even better damage output. But look further, because there are some secrets under these baggy sleeves. Cannon of Haima is the only spell, probably the only attack in the game I can even think of, that can 2-tap revive a teammate with 3 bars. It can flinch Tree Sentinels and Crucible Knights even when uncharged. The massive blast radius makes it good at both getting stacks during your ult and putting in damage with those stacks on a tough boss afterwards. You gotta get yourself in the mindset of it, but it's really easy to do, and honestly, it's probably the best revival sorcery in the entire game. Number 10, Adula's Moonblade. It's better than Carian Greatsword because you also get status buildup on top of just more damage and range than you would with Carian Greatsword, but FP efficiency is not the strongest on this one. I think it's its most glaring drawback. 22 FP per cast gives this sorcery one of the lowest FP efficiencies in the sorcery lineup. It still counts as a Carian Sword sorcery, even in Night Rain, so the relic effect that improves Carian sorceries still affect the damage on Adula's Moonblade, but there isn't really a proper representation for a damage comparison here because you also need to think about the Frostbite proc as well as the subsequent Frostbite debuff that comes with it. So I would still prefer Moonblade over the former, but only if I'm using a relic build that compensates for its high FP usage, which I think is a good thing because Knight of Miasma and Dark Knight of the Wise happen to be 2 of Duchess's best. Number 9, Gravity Well. All the convenience of collapsing stars condensed into a single bullet that needs 6 less FP to get going. Enemy AI finds it hard to dodge just like collapsing stars. It gets close to hitting 300 base damage when charging it, and it comes with the additional value of being guaranteed on every meteorite staff. Summoning skeletons and launching asteroids at bosses is all good and fine if your FP can sustain it, but when things need to die quickly, the best spell is usually just a single VFX traveling in a line from my staff directly into the boss's gooch, and Gravity Well is a gold standard of this simplicity. Number 8 and 7, Comet and Glintstone Comet Shard. The ebb and flow of learning what each of these sorceries were capable of resulted in them both being listed right next to each other because I just stopped giving a shit at some point. Like, I think that's just a decision I'm gonna have to be fine with because no other order makes sense to me. If I'm being completely honest, Comet Shard is essentially just Comet level damage with 7 less FP. Both sorceries still pierce targets, meaning they're both pretty comfortable to use for building stacks during your ult if you can line up a few good pieces of trash, but a Duchess with very limited FP regen will almost always find Comet Shard more comfortable to play with. I also personally like the smaller hitbox size on the Comet Shard when fighting in packed hallways. Comet's hitbox size is twice as big, and it doesn't happen often enough to like actually be a problem, but every so often if you're trying to cast this on a slope or something, it might just hit a snag, like it'll just headbutt the fucking Earth horizon line and it'll just not hit anything. However, just because Comet appears to come up as the loser in the efficiency race doesn't mean it should be ignored at every turn, and that's because the Comet sorcery has a special hidden ace in the hole of its own. I know I just glazed Cannon of Haima and how it was amazing for revives. I still think this one might be better. Comet might be the best sorcery in the game, specifically for reviving teammates. The revive value on this sorcery is 271 and 285 when charged, meaning it just barely beats out Night Comet while retaining the same casting speed, which is fast, like fast as fuck. If your teammate is 3-barred in the corner, your Guardian is fighting for every inch of his life, and you feel like the run is in dire straits, throw back a Cerulean Hidden Tier, lock onto that dumb bitch, and just start blasting. Number 6, Rancor Call. I don't even know what to say for this one. This sorcery slaps your dad and then packs your lunch. Rancor Call is an unfuckwithable combination of burst and sustain in a single sorcery. The bullets are active for long enough to be a consistent pressure on just about any target, while also being slow enough for you to cast other sorceries in such a way that all your damage hits the target at once. And for Duchess mains, restage ability is one of the greatest qualities any source of damage could ever have. And it's guaranteed on the Prince of Death staff. It's one of the GOATs, if I'm being honest. Number 5, Oracle Bubbles. It might seem conflicting to rank a sorcery with no dedicated relic effect boost this high up, but there's a larger part of me that completely understands why it doesn't have one. If you see a sorcery tier list that doesn't have Oracle Bubbles in S tier, do not trust this person. This sorcery launches 9 bubbles very slowly towards a target and then stopping at a moderately close distance, so you need to be like whites of their eyes level of distance away from your target for this to punch as hard as you want it to, but the bullets all stay active for a total of 6 seconds, and the long active time allows you to cast it in preparation for specific attacks. For example, I like doing this against Adel when I know it's about to perform a leaping attack, because that means it'll likely headbutt all 9 in the process and take the full damage. An uncharged cast of Oracle Bubbles racks up 459 damage and 21.6 stance damage minus enemy defenses. Charging it ups the damage total to 531, dealing 31.5 stance. This sorcery is only 12 FP, by the way. Granted, these numbers usually represent a cast that literally barrel stuffs your target at the same distance between you and your phone screen right now, but it's just the same thing I said with Crystal Burst. Bouncing between close and mid-range is precisely what a Duchess wants to do anyway, and a lot of times that's going to leave you in the perfect position to cast this right down a bitch's throat with very little consequence. Number 4, Night Comet. I wanted to say at the beginning here that enemies not being able to dodge it is kind of an overrated benefit. I'm gonna be real, I don't know why the fuck I even typed that, because that's just false. Not killing standard field bosses quickly enough because I'm suddenly playing competitive hopscotch is grounds for a crash out. Zamor Knights, Stone Skins, Nox Warriors, even Gargoyles can dance around some of your magic spam if they're far enough away and they know you're doing it. So even though it doesn't quite measure in at the same damage you get on Comet or Comet Shard, the additional confidence of knowing there's not a shitload of hell a boss can do when I fire this off is really nice. I think my favorite utility of Night Comet is that it's very good for putting down red wolves, and fighting this boss without it is kind of what I imagine servers feel like when they get DDoSed. Like, Jesus Christ, these dumbass dogs just waste so much of your fucking time, bro. Like, it straight up just feels like the game is trying to take a knee and run down the clock on your ass. Also, revive damage. Holy fat fucking hell. 250 revive power on this hoe, 263 if charged. Cannon of Haima looks better on paper because of the insanely high revive MV, but I honestly might prefer Night Comet and Comet as revival tools because of how fast they both put in the work. It appears on every Staff of Loss, it has a dedicated relic boost, it travels in a straight line, it pierces enemies. I can't glaze it enough, honestly. Number 3, Carian Piercer. I would form a parasocial relationship with this spell. I would invite it to my wedding. Carian Piercer is almost everything I could ever want in nearly every situation. This sorcery is Gavel of Haima with Axe Body Spray and a pair of truck nuts. I understand that it's not guaranteed on a Carian staff, and finding it is left mostly up to Dormant Power RNG, but basic merchants can still sell it. It gets its own dedicated relic bonus because it's a Carian Sword sorcery. It's the only Carian Sword sorcery that can be charged, opening up more opportunities for weapon passives. The windup is fast, the range feels like cheating. It can throw medium-sized bosses like Grave Wardens and Stone Skins right on their ass, and it can even flinch Crucible Knights and Tree Sentinels out of their attacks when charged. And yes, this does include Loretta, and that should be a huge selling point for this sorcery because according to Bandai Namco's official data infographic, this old bitch has spanked more of us than any other field boss in the game. With almost any other sorcery, knowing the safety windows, knowing when it's okay to cast a spell against a certain boss is on your shoulders. Carian Piercer finds itself above this rule very often, because an attack with a stagger value this high allows you to get away with literally just stun locking half the fucking game. The revive damage isn't the greatest, and 17 FP ain't cheap, but when Loretta spends 80% of her screen time getting speared harder than a Pornhub intern because she can't finish her phase 2 animation, I'm just not gonna care. Holy shit, I love this sorcery. Number 2, I can't believe I'm doing this, Shatter Earth. Okay, Just shut the fuck up and let me explain. The more arguments I find in favor of this, the more it feels like I'm underappreciating it. I don't think there is a way to appreciate it an accurate amount. So if the math is mathing on this one, landing all the hits of Shatter Earth makes it the most efficient sorcery in the game in terms of FP to damage. You're trading just about 500 base damage for only 10 FP, and throwing the follow-up cast into the mix doesn't even bring the efficiency down as much as you'd think. It's 20 FP in total in exchange for almost 800 base damage, which is still nuts. But wait, there's more! The stance damage on both the initial and follow-up casts total out to 34.3, assuming the entire sorcery is landing on something. The follow-up can stagger Banished Knights, Leonines, Omens, Zamor Knights, enemies of that size, and you can very easily abuse restage iframes to guarantee a safety window, making it way easier to land the follow-up while also restaging the initial hit of the sorcery. And, probably my favorite benefit to building around Shatter Earth, it's guaranteed to appear on a staff that you can find in fucking multitudes. Each mine's POI on the map contains several glintstone miners, as well as some common spots in the Great Hollow, making farming for this staff very route friendly because you'll almost definitely want a purple smithing stone anyways, so why not just farm for this staff while you're at it? Like, holy shit, the amount of times I think I've landed on this exact spell in a single run, and just for how good it is, like, god damn it. Number 1, Carian Slicer. Yeah, it's Carian Slicer. Here it is. Hope you don't like plot twists, because you ain't getting one today. Yeah, I wish I could have prepared a bigger surprise for everyone, but this list is not an underdog tale. There is no dark horse candidate when it comes to ranking sorceries. Absolute DPS cannon, 4 FP for 170 base damage, unbelievably quick casting time that's further heightened with casting speed passives, comes with its own dash attack animation that makes cleaning up trash a breeze, restage iframing through an attack feels very comfortable and doesn't interrupt the chain, while also copying the damage from previous Slicer casts, complements Duchess's signature chain dodge and backstep very well since you have unique animations for both, always appears on the Carian staff, gets its own relic boost, it can proc successive attack bonuses, giving it synergy with Wingsword and boss relics like Dark Knight of the Wise, and it's a close range sorcery which just so happens to be Duchess's preferred range of engagement. It's one of the only instances I would actually recommend speccing into sorcery subtype relic buffs because the final damage is just that worth it. I also feel like running into Carian Slicer is extremely common. Like, someone needs to look at the spawn rates for these because I swear to god I land on this spell twice as much as I do Shattering Crystal, and that shit gets 2 different stabs. My neighbors have an alarm clock, and it's my dumbass yelling the words Carian Slicer at 3 AM from the top of a rise because I'm signaling to the boys that we've just earned a free W. You could save time and effort by screenshotting victory at the end of a run and making it your fucking wallpaper.